The wind howled over the desert flats, scraping across the dry earth like bones over stone. Abigail Wren stirred the embers in her fireplace, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Another bitter night, the kind that stole the breath from lungs and turned fingers brittle. She had just bolted the door when a sound startled her. Not the wind, not the coyotes. A knock. Soft. Barely there. She froze. Her farm sat 30 miles from the nearest town, and no traveler came this far without a reason. Her hand went to the rifle above the hearth. Another knock. Still gentle, but persistent. Abigail crept to the door, heart hammering. She eased it open an inch. There, half-shadowed by the moonlight, stood a boy no older than 7. His skin was the shade of red clay, his hair tangled with dust and twigs. No shoes, no coat. He said nothing. Just stood there, eyes dark as coal, lips pressed in silence. Her breath caught. Apache. She knew the risk. The memory of her husband's charred body beneath the cottonwoods still burned behind her eyelids. But the boy's hands shook. His toes were purple with cold. And she, damn her, felt something break inside. "I have nothing for you," she said, her voice tight. He didn't flinch, didn't beg, only waited. She looked past him. No horse, no wagon, no adults. The desert stretched behind him, empty and cruel. Abigail stepped back. "One night," she muttered. "You can sleep by the fire." The boy entered without a word, his steps silent on the floorboards. He sat near the hearth, folding into himself like a wounded animal. She gave him a blanket. He wrapped it around his small frame and closed his eyes. She watched him as the flames danced on the walls. He didn't move, didn't stir. She waited for sleep to come, but it wouldn't. The boy's presence filled the room, thick and unspoken. There was something strange about him, something ancient. Yet her fear slowly drained, replaced by a bone-deep sorrow she couldn't name. At some point in the night she drifted off in her chair, the crackling fire the only sound between them. What harm could come from one night, she whispered to herself before sleep took her. If this story's already pulling you in, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Because by morning, nothing would ever be the same for Abigail Wren. The morning light spilled across Abigail's face as she stirred in her chair. Her joints ached. The fire had burned low, casting weak orange shadows. She blinked herself awake and looked toward the hearth. The boy was gone. She stood quickly, searching the corners of the room. The blanket he had wrapped himself in lay folded with perfect care by the fire. No footprints, no door left open. It was as if he had vanished into the smoke. Abigail moved to the front door, heart thudding. She swung it open and stepped outside, and froze. Feathers, hundreds of them, black, glossy, scattered across her porch, her roof, her windowsills. They clung to the fences and drifted across the fields like dark snow. No birds in sight, no wind, just the unnatural stillness of morning and the faint, copper scent of cold air. She looked up. Feathers lined her roof like shingles, catching the light. Her mouth went dry. Back inside, she spotted one feather lying alone where the boy had slept. Long, jet black, eagle, raven. She couldn't tell. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the mantel. Something about it felt sacred, or wrong, or both. By mid-morning, the neighbors arrived to trade eggs for flour. Martha Cleary noticed the feathers first. "Sweet God, Abby," she whispered, eyes wide. "You been plucking geese in your sleep?" Abigail forced a laugh, but it didn't land. Martha stepped back from the porch like the wood itself might bite. "Where'd they all come from?" Abigail asked, feigning curiosity. Martha shrugged too quickly. "Don't rightly know, but I'd sweep 'em off, quick." Later that day, old Caleb Morris rode up with a crate of apples. He didn't dismount. "Feathers all over your land," he said without greeting. "You let someone in last night." Abigail narrowed her eyes. "What are you saying, Caleb?" He chewed his lip, then spat. "You heard the tales. Sometimes spirits come wearing faces, Apache faces, come knocking when it's cold. If you open the door, you invite 'em in. Into your home, into your life, into your luck. That's superstition, she snapped. He leaned forward in the saddle. Maybe. Or maybe your name's already being whispered in their songs? She stepped back, the chill of his words sinking deeper than the frost. After he left, Abigail stood on her porch, watching the windless sky. Not a single bird flew above, just silence, and the feathers, always the feathers, drifting like omens. In the stillness, something stirred in her chest, a slow creeping fear that this boy hadn't just come seeking warmth. He had brought something with him, something she didn't yet understand. The feathers didn't blow away. Abigail tried sweeping them, but they clung to the wood and dirt like they belonged there. She burned a pile. The smoke rose black and thick, but the next morning more had appeared, fresh and glistening with dew. Restless, she saddled her mule and rode toward the canyon beyond the wheat fields. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Maybe tracks, maybe answers. She only knew she couldn't sit still, not with that feather staring at her from the mantle like an unblinking eye. The desert narrowed into stone-walled silence. Jagged cliffs loomed overhead, the air thin and dry. Abigail dismounted and walked the narrow trail, eyes scanning the dirt. No footprints, but here and there, a single black feather stuck in the brush, caught on rock. She followed. The sun hung low and heavy when she stopped. The air shifted, just slightly, and with it, a shimmer. It was there for only a heartbeat. Flashes, like heat mirages, fire licking up cottonwood trunks, screams in a language she didn't know, a woman's cry, raw and endless, a child ducking behind a rock. Then it was gone. The canyon was silent again. Abigail stood still, heart pounding. She had seen something, she was sure of it, a memory not her own. She backed away slowly and returned home as the first stars appeared. That evening, as she rinsed her hands at the well, she heard hooves approaching. A dust trail rose along the road. She recognized the rider by the way he sat his horse, straight-backed, cautious, always watching. Sheriff Eli Cutter. He hadn't visited her land in 2 years, not since the funeral. He reined in, eyes scanning her roof, her yard, the feathers. "Evening, Abigail," he said. "What brings you?" she asked, drying her hands. "Trouble. Raiders hit a rail camp near Black Ridge. Apache from the look of it. 6 dead, 1 missing." She folded her arms. "What's that got to do with me?" He dismounted, voice low. "Someone said you were seen talking to a boy. Dark hair." "No shoes." Her stomach knotted. "A child. 1 night. He was cold." "Did he speak?" She shook her head. "Not a word." Cutter looked toward the feathers. "That roof of yours tells a story. Maybe not the one you want." Abigail didn't answer. After a pause, he softened. "You're alone out here. Don't go getting wrapped up in something you don't understand." She watched him mount his horse. "He didn't look like a killer," she said. Cutter stared at her a long moment. "Neither do most ghosts, till they start walking." He tipped his hat and rode off. As night fell, Abigail stood at her doorway, staring at the canyon. She didn't believe in spirits. Not really. But she also didn't believe feathers could fall from nothing. And now, they were in her dreams. The fire came back to her like a fever dream. Years ago, under the same wide stars, her husband Nathan had gone out to check the west fence. He never returned. When they found him, he was little more than ash and bone, bound to a charred post. The sheriff called it a raid. The preacher called it fate. Abigail called it the day her life burned down. She had buried him with his wedding band and a rifle stock melted by flame, and she'd buried her forgiveness beside him. Now the memory flared again, vivid and raw, as if stirred by the strange boy's arrival. She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. The scent of smoke, real or remembered, that clung to her throat. Late that night she stepped outside to clear her head. The sky was black and glittering, no wind, no moon. But something pulled her gaze toward the fields. A faint trail of feathers. She followed them, barefoot across the frozen dirt, her breath misting in the air. The trail led to a low outcrop where something impossible waited. In the stone itself, smooth, sun-bleached granite, was a footprint, small, bare. Pressed deep like molten glass had shaped it. It hadn't been carved, it had been seared. Her stomach turned. She stepped back, heart racing. That's when she heard it. A rustle behind her, soft and wet. She spun. The boy stood in the shadows, his tunic torn, shoulder bleeding, eyes fever bright. "Jesus!" she gasped, rushing forward. "What happened?" He didn't answer. He held something clutched tight in both hands, a cord strung with a carved bone pendant, old and worn. He looked at her with desperation, then pressed it into her palm. "You must bury it," he whispered, voice low and broken. Her fingers curled around the pendant, cold as river stone. "Why?" she asked. But he swayed on his feet, and before he could speak again, his knees buckled. She caught him as he collapsed, his body frighteningly light. Abigail dragged him back to the farmhouse, cradling his head, whispering reassurances she didn't believe. Inside, she pulled open the trapdoor to the cellar and laid him gently in the hay. The wound on his shoulder oozed dark and thick. She tore linen into strips and bandaged him best she could. He didn't cry. Just breathed shallow, shivering. Above them, hooves thundered past the house. She froze. More riders, men with torches, shouts in the distance, dogs barking. Abigail eased the trapdoor shut, heart slamming against her ribs. She blew out the lamps. Silence returned like a knife. Down in the cellar the boy slept, the pendant lying between them like a question she couldn't yet answer. The dogs came first, barking, sniffing, howling. Then came the voices, slurred with drink, tight with fear. A dozen men or more, stomping through her land with lanterns and rifles, trampling stalks and kicking up dust. Abigail crouched behind the window, every muscle tense. Inside the cellar the boy slept motionless, wrapped in shadows and blood. She pressed her fingers to her lips, praying the boards wouldn't creak. Outside someone pounded on her door. "Abby!" a voice slurred. "You in there?" She recognized the tone. Jack Norrin. He owned 2 oxen and half a brain. She didn't answer. A second voice, sharper. "We're looking for an Apache scout, little one. Might be hiding with someone." A third man added, "Cutter said you saw a boy." "I saw a child," Abigail said through the door. "He's gone." "Open up," Jack barked. "I'm not hiding anyone." A silence followed, long and sour. Then the unmistakable sound of boots on her porch. Someone tried the latch. She stepped back and leveled the rifle. "I swear to God," she said, voice cold, "first man through that door'll lose more than pride." They paused. After a moment, the sharp-voiced man, Curtis Maddox, said, "We ain't here to hurt you, Abby, but you keeping secrets gets folks killed." "I don't take kindly to mobs on my land," she snapped. Another silence, then footsteps, moving away. "We'll be back," Jack muttered. With the sheriff. When their torches disappeared into the trees, she let the breath out of her lungs. Downstairs the boy stirred. Abigail lit a small oil lamp and opened the cellar. His eyes fluttered, fever glazed. "They're gone," she whispered, kneeling beside him. He didn't speak, but when their eyes met, something passed between them. Not language, but recognition. Not trust, but something beginning to lean in that direction. She checked the wound. The bleeding had slowed, still angry, still hot, but not fatal. She hoped. Later, she made tea and sat in the dark, the pendant on the table before her. It seemed heavier than bone, as though it carried all the weight of whatever had chased him here. Outside, the wind picked up, but the feathers didn't move. That night she dreamt of them falling, not gently but like hail, sharp and fast. They whispered in tongues she didn't know. One word kept rising, "Berry." When she awoke, sweat clinging to her skin, she went to the cellar. The boy was asleep again, curled beneath a wool blanket. Abigail sat beside him, rifle in her lap. She had no plan, no answers, but the cellar felt like a sanctuary now. Or a cradle, or a grave. She wouldn't let them take him. Whatever he was, whoever had sent him, he was hers to protect now. The moon rose blood red that night. It hovered low on the horizon like an open wound, casting long, rust-colored shadows across the plains. Even the animals sensed it. The horses wouldn't eat. The chickens huddled silent in their coop. Abigail stood at her porch, breath shallow, watching the land hold its breath. Inside, the boy sat up in the cellar, eyes wide and distant. He hadn't spoken again since the night he pressed the pendant into her hands. His fever had broken, but his silence returned with it. Still, something had changed. That morning she found him in the barn, crouched beside a lamb she'd thought was already gone. Gate's chest had been still, tongue dry. Abigail had gone to fetch a spade. But when she returned, the lamb stood on trembling legs, blinking up at her, bleating weakly. The boy didn't explain. Just placed his hand on the lamb's head and walked away. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she saddled the mule and rode north into the hills, towards someone who might understand what none of the men in town could. Lita Greywolf lived alone in a ravine tucked with juniper and smoke. Half Apache, half Irish, and wholly feared by the settlers, Lita was healer, widow, and keeper of forgotten stories. Abigail hadn't seen her in years. Lita welcomed her with a knowing glance. "Sayu brought something in," she said before Abigail even spoke. "Someone," Abigail corrected. "A child." Lita poured tea. "Not anymore." Abigail hesitated. "He heals things, animals, but he bleeds like we do. He sleeps. He dreams." Lita nodded. "So do spirits when they wear skin." She told her the story of the spirit children, how when a soul is torn from life before its time, the dead may borrow its shape. Some come seeking vengeance, others peace. All carry a message. All must be answered. Abigail showed her the pendant. Lita paled. This belonged to Elkin Shadow, a war leader. His son was taken by settlers 10 winters ago. Vanished. Some say he died in a Christian school, buried without a name. Others say his soul never left the land, only waited. Abigail's voice dropped. "What does he want from me?" Lita met her eyes. "That depends what you took." Abigail shook her head. "I didn't take anything." Lita smiled, sad and small. "Sometimes protection is a debt too." As Abigail rode home, the sky burned crimson. The blood moon hung heavier now. The boy waited on the porch, barefoot, his gaze locked on the horizon. She dismounted, walked to him, and placed the pendant in his hands. "I'll help you," she said. His fingers closed around it. And for the first time he smiled. The pendant felt heavier now. Abigail kept it in a linen pouch beneath her blouse, but even wrapped it seemed to throb faintly against her skin. She didn't tell the boy she had spoken with Lita. He already knew. There was something in his silence, not secretive, but ancient, like he had lived this all before. That week, strange things stirred in town. 2 horses were found dead with feathers packed into their mouths. A barn caught fire without lightning or spark. Rumors grew teeth. People whispered of curses, of spirit signs, of the price of sympathy, and every story circled back to Abigail Wren. On the 4th day, Sheriff Cutter returned. He brought 5 men, guns, dogs, and fear. He knocked once. She opened the door with the rifle in her hands. "We need to talk," he said. Abigail stepped aside. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten much, but her spine held straight. "The town's ready to burn your farm," Cutter said. "You need to hand him over." "There's no one here but me," she lied. He scanned the room. His eyes landed on the feather on her mantle. It hadn't moved since the first night. "That child, he's not natural, you know that." She didn't answer. Cutter paced, voice lowering. "I read the signs. This is retribution, the old blood rising. We all thought the past was buried, but it wasn't, it was waiting." Abigail locked eyes with him. "So, what do you want? Another funeral?" He didn't blink. "I want you to live, Abby. But they won't stop, not unless they believe the threat's gone." Her hands shook, not from fear, from fury. "I gave him shelter. That's all." Cutter stared hard. "Maybe that's all it takes." That night, Abigail buried the pendant in the far corner of the field. The earth was dry, hard. As she covered it, the wind howled through the wheat, and a shadow passed over the moon. When she turned, the boy was there, watching. "You said to bury it," she whispered. "I did." He didn't nod, didn't speak. Just looked at her with something that might have been sorrow or warning. By dawn, the barn was covered in feathers. Black, endless. She tried to gather them to hide the evidence, but they clung to her clothes, her hands, her throat. When she opened her mouth to call the animals, one feather drifted in, sharp and cold as steel. The town had seen enough. Curtis Maddox arrived by midday with 10 men and a crate of dynamite. Abigail stood on her porch, shotgun in hand. The boy watched from the doorway behind her, quiet as always. They were done whispering now. They were ready to burn. They came at dusk. Maddox in front, dynamite in one hand, torch in the other. Behind him, the men of the valley, some with rifles, others with pitchforks, all with the same raw fear in their eyes, the kind of fear that begged for something to destroy. Abigail stood in the center of her yard, shotgun steady against her shoulder. The boy remained in the doorway behind her, silent, watching. "You have one chance," Maddox shouted. "Hand it over." "He's not a thing," Abigail called back. "You think that matters." Someone stepped forward. "It ain't natural, Abby. The birds, the wind, the fires. You've cursed this land." "No," she said. "You did that yourselves." Maddox lit the fuse. She cocked the shotgun. A gust of wind rose, sudden, violent. It knocked the torch from Maddox's hand. The flame sputtered in the dirt. Feathers began to fall. From nowhere, from everywhere. They swirled around the mob, black and sharp, dancing in the wind like blades. Men shouted, stumbling, covering their faces. One dropped his rifle and ran. Another tripped, screaming as feathers wrapped around his throat like fingers. Cutter arrived too late, galloping in from the ridge. He leapt from his horse as the wind intensified. He stared in disbelief at the storm of feathers, the way they didn't drift but struck, precise and cutting. Abigail stood unmoved, hair whipping, coat snapping. She lowered the shotgun. "No more blood," she said. One of the men, a young one, maybe 19, raised a pistol and fired. The bullet struck the boy in the chest. He didn't fall. He stepped forward. The feathers thickened around him, cloaking his frame. His eyes glowed, not with light but with memory. Generations of it. Pain, fire, dust. The sound of mourning songs carried on the wind. The boy reached out and touched the young man's forehead. The man screamed at once, then collapsed. Cutter ran to him, checked for breath. "Dead," someone whispered. But then the boy knelt, placing both hands over the man's heart. And the wind stopped. The feathers fell still. The boy breathed slow and deep. Beneath his palms, the young man's chest rose, then again. His eyes fluttered open, alive. The men backed away, stunned. Cutter stood slowly. His gun slipped from his fingers. "What is he?" someone whispered. Abigail turned to the boy, now standing at her side. "Something we were never meant to forget," she said. Silence fell over the valley. One by one, the men turned and left. No curses, no threats, just quiet retreat, like children who had touched fire and finally understood its heat. Only Cutter remained. He looked at Abigail, searching for something he could hold on to. She gave him none. He rode away without a word. The valley held its breath. No more mobs, no more shouting. Just silence, the kind that settled heavy on the land, as if even the trees were waiting. Abigail and the boy walked through the center of town the next morning. No one stopped them. Doors shut softly. Curtains shifted. Children stared wide-eyed from behind rocking chairs. Men looked down at their boots. Not in defiance, in reverence. They reached the well in the square. Abigail drew water, handed it to the boy. He drank slowly, savoring it. Then he turned north, toward the hills. She followed without asking. They walked for miles, through dry grass and pale dust until the ground changed, redder, richer. Here the wind hummed. The air grew still, and at the base of a low hill, they stopped. Before them stood a burial mound, ringed with stones topped by a carved wooden figure barely standing. The paint had long faded. Only the shape remained, arms out, eyes closed. The boy knelt, took the pendant from around his neck, and laid it on the mound. Then he spoke, not to her, to the earth, to the wind, to the names. He whispered in Apache, a language Abigail didn't know but felt. Each syllable settled in her bones like embers, names, places, wounds. He spoke them all. And as he did, feathers began to drift down. Not black this time, white, pale as breath. They fell slowly, gently, resting on the mound, her shoulders, the ground. When he finished, he stood. Abigail stepped forward. "Is it done?" He looked at her, eyes soft, and nodded once. She opened her mouth to speak again, but the air shimmered, subtly like heat off stone. The boy's form wavered. He didn't seem surprised. His fingers loosened at his sides. His chest rose, then slowed. Feathers stirred at his feet. One lifted on its own, floating upward. "Wait," she whispered, suddenly terrified. "Don't." But he stepped back. Another feather lifted, then another. His hair began to scatter, strand by strand, dissolving into threads of wind and light. His eyes stayed on hers, calm, grateful, ancient, and then he was gone. Not in a flash, not in fire. He simply unmade. Feathers settled in his place. Abigail dropped to her knees, hands empty. She didn't cry, didn't scream. Only bowed her head and whispered back one word, unsure of its meaning but sure of its weight. "Ahiyi. Thank you." A breeze passed over the mound. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, and in the deepest quiet, something in her broke free. Not grief, not loss. Peace. Seasons turned. The feathers never stopped. Abigail's roof became a roost for ravens, crows, and hawks, birds no one dared shoo away. They came without fear, nested without invitation. Her home stood untouched, her land green in drought, her livestock untouched by sickness. Some said she'd made a pact, others called her a witch. But children, especially the quiet ones, came to her gate with small offerings, stones, feathers, flowers, left on the steps without a word. She never turned them away. The boy never returned, not as a shadow, not as a ghost. But she felt him in the wind, in the stillness, in the hush before dawn, hush. And when she found a single feather on her pillow each morning, always different, always waiting, she whispered thanks without opening her eyes. One evening, Cutter rode out again, alone. He looked older, thinner, like something had been gnawing at him too long. She met him on the porch, wiping flour from her hands. "I thought I might find you gone," he said. "I am," she replied. "Just not the way you mean." He didn't ask what she meant, just handed her a small wooden box. Inside was a folded page, the boy's likeness, crudely drawn, marked "Missing." 1870, Carlisle Indian School, Pennsylvania. She stared at it for a long time. Cutter cleared his throat. There was no grave, just his name on a list. "He has one now," she said. He nodded. Before he left, he looked at the roof. "Still feathers?" "Always. I still don't understand what he was." Abigail smiled, soft and sad. A memory that wouldn't let go. A name that refused to be forgotten. He nodded again, then mounted and rode off without another word. That night she lit a candle, placed the drawing beside it and whispered all the names she could remember. His was first. The rest followed like prayer. Years passed. Children grew. Some brave ones came to hear her stories. Others came to learn to listen, not just to birds or wind, but to silence too. That's where the truth lived now, and the story of the boy, the cold Apache child with no shoes and a sky full of feathers, was never written down. It didn't need to be. It lived in the hush of wings overhead. In the way people left the last slice of bread for someone else, in the quiet understanding that every name deserves to rest. If this story stayed with you, if you felt its echo, subscribe to the channel. There are more tales waiting, more voices that haven't yet been heard, and don't stop here. Click the video on your screen now for the next haunting story from the edges of time, where legend, truth, and memory meet.